Donald Trump's own top advisor is leaking his crimes and calling him a liar. That is the state of a White House that we have never seen in more chaos than it is today. And we are going to get into it all and why it is showing us how Donald Trump is falling apart. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video. And if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, of course, this story is breaking because of another unfolding event happening in our country right now, which is Donald Trump's illegal strikes on Venezuela, this declaration of war that it seems he is moving to without congressional approval. And that is very important for the story of what Donald Trump's top advisor just did, but increasingly important is these updates that we are getting. And I want to start with some of them from Rachel Maddow because it colors what we're going to get into.
Brazil had a sort of Trump-ish authoritarian leader in Jair Bolsonaro who tried to pull off the same kind of effort at a coup that President Trump tried on January 6th. It didn't succeed. He was prosecuted, and the U.S. has now sanctioned Brazil in punishment for having tried to protect its election system from an effort at violent overthrow. Now, if the idea is that Venezuela deserved this bombing and invasion and the removal of its president because of an unfair election there, or because of a contested election there, or because of the dictatorial rule of Maduro, well, okay, now do Brazil. Why would we be taking completely opposite takes on these pretextual issues with different South American and Central American countries? How do you have the MS-13 linked president of El Salvador in the U.S. Oval Office with that, with all of the pledges of friendship, and us sending people from the United States into one of his prisons if the issue is gangs? How do you have the Honduran former president pardoned inexplicably by Donald Trump after he put some of Trump's friends on his payroll, after that guy was convicted of smuggling hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States? I mean, none of what we have learned, I think, for multiple administrations, for multiple bad foreign policy decisions in our country, is that when the things they are saying are the reasons for their actions are proven to not be the reasons for their actions, you have to ask yourself what it's really for. And in this case, I hope we learn something real about that from this president this hour.
Colonel Jack was talking to me before we started the show, and one of the points that he was making is that when pressuring a country, whether you are wanting to achieve regime change or some sort of stability, there's usually a mix of diplomatic and economic action and perhaps the threat of military action. This has been a very unusual situation. We have 15,000 troops off of the coast of Venezuela. We've got an aircraft carrier strike group. We've got F-35s in Puerto Rico. This is set up to be a very big military action. Now, Marco Rubio says that's probably done with. They've got Maduro, and I don't know whether that means the boat's all turned back. But this has not been. There was more headroom available on the diplomatic front and the economic front. And Donald Trump did say that Maduro was prepared to talk and that they were talking and that there was some possibility of a surrender. We're not quite sure how this all happened because they're talking about a capture, that they dragged him out of his bedroom. But there's a way this could have worked out differently.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we don't know the justification for the action overall. We also don't know the justification for these tactics in particular, for this type of action, this type of raid and seizure of that country's leader, the way that we've seen it. And maybe we will get that explanation from the president. We shall see. But I mean, stepping back from this a little bit, Ali, I also think, cognizant of what we have been talking about for the last year since Trump has been back in office and what type of leader he appears to want to be. And he is not unique. He is not, this is not the first sort of iteration of this type of leader we have seen around the world. And one thing that we know about this type of sort of would-be strongman is that questions of legality and illegality are ones that he that may play differently for him than they would for a non-strongman leader. For example, I think that to the extent that this can be defined in the United States as having been an illegal action, I actually think Trump will see that as a political plus.
Donald Trump has no justification, no real reasoning, no congressional approval, and he doesn't seem to care at this point. But people in his administration do and have and went on the record. And that person was the person who recently caused a lot of problems for Donald Trump by going on the record. And it's Susie Wiles. And her words are being brought back up again. And I would say keep in mind that Susie Wiles said that, what she said in this interview with Vanity Fair that is coming back to bite Donald Trump as he launches these illegal strikes is that she didn't believe she was on the record or it was taken out of context. So maybe this little bit from Susie Wiles was a hot mic moment. Maybe it's just her lying. I think it's just her lying. But either way, this information coming back to bite Donald Trump in the butt, doesn't look great today. Trump's own chief of staff said president needed Congress to approve land strikes on Venezuela. In the hours after Donald Trump's decision to launch a strike on Venezuela, observers are calling out a recently published quote from White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, one which seems to run counter to the administration's actions. Wiles, in a piece published on December 16th by Vanity Fair, was questioned by writer Chris Whipple about the strikes on suspected Venezuelan narco boats. Wiles defended those strikes, saying, "I'm saying that this is a war on drugs." Wiles told the reporter, "It's unlike another one that we've seen, but that's what this is." Obviously, it's a war declared only by the president and without any congressional approval, Whipple replied. "Don't need it yet," Wiles responded. But yet was the operative word in the sentence, as the chief of staff went on to make clear that if Trump sought to launch a land strike on Venezuela, he would have to first get a green light from Congress. If he were to authorize some activity on land, then it's war. Then we'd need Congress, Susie Wiles said. But Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, to some extent, are up on the Hill every day briefing. But that is not how Saturday's attack played out. The president did not seek congressional authorization before launching his land strike, which led to the Venezuelan president's capture, and observers are pointing out the contrast between comments from Wiles and the administration's actions. Susie Wiles biting Donald Trump in the ass again. And you would think 2 weeks ago, if this was a plan that was coming together, Susie Wiles might have thought before she spoke. I know this was a long, ongoing series of interviews that was conducted. It didn't just happen on December 16th, obviously, when the article was published, but there is no clear, coherent strategy if Susie Wiles, while admitting the truth, is giving away the game and saying that Donald Trump, if he were to carry out land strikes as he did without congressional approval, he would be violating the Constitution. He would be breaking the law. Susie Wiles should have known not to say that. The only reason she wouldn't is if she didn't know that was happening. And if she didn't know that's happening, it's a really great indication of how much is falling apart in Donald Trump's White House. And that is what we continue to see. And that is what Rachel Maddow, I think, did a great job breaking down, at least when it comes to the messaging that makes no sense. And of course, the intentionality isn't there with any real reason. And I think the rest of her breakdown was incredibly important and colors this all very well.
Things that David Rode, who's with us this morning, was pointing out is that it's not clear yet, but it does seem like congressional authorization was not sought for this action. But that's par for the course, to your point, right? Donald Trump, if he thinks the law is in his way as it relates to military action, Congress is where that law is, where you bump up against that law. So he may not be as troubled by it. But this morning we're hearing from members of Congress, we'll have some on the show, and from members of the Senate from both parties who feel that the bombing of those boats off of Venezuela was illegal, and that this may itself be illegal. That used to be relevant. That used to be a big conversation that would occupy a lot of our thought. Seems to just play a smaller role these days.
Yeah, it's two things. One is that I think a lot of previous presidents have broken those rules, and so we inherit from President George H.W. Bush and Pam. All right, like we inherit from George W. Bush in terms of his invasion. Right, we inherit a presidential sense of entitlement around war powers that is totally unjustified by the Constitution. This is what I wrote my first book about. But it's something that's been eroding for a long time, this idea that Congress controls whether or not we go to war. And I sincerely hope that in my lifetime we will get back to the founders' vision of who's supposed to declare war and how we're supposed to do it. But Donald Trump won't be the one to have broken that. But on a second point, Ali, I really feel like what we've seen with the boat strikes and what we've seen with the president's domestic agenda is that if he had a choice to do this within the law or a choice to do it blatantly flouting the law, he would choose the latter. Because I think he thinks that makes him seem strong, and because I think he thinks that essentially doesn't just break the law in the sense of violating the law, it breaks the law in terms of its ability to constrain him in the future. And I think that this president does not feel bound by the laws established by the United States Congress, nor does he particularly feel bound by the rulings of most U.S. courts. And so I think that he'll see illegality in this case as a plus, and he will hope that the debate domestically about what he's just done is about the constitutionality of his actions, because I think he'd proudly proclaim that he's acting outside the Constitution, and hope to turn that to political capital in a sort of strongman narrative that he's so obviously enamored of in this second term.
My advice to Democrats, I don't know if they need it, I'll give it anyways, which Rachel Maddow hints at a bit, is that I think that Donald Trump wanting to make this at least for his base, an issue of the legality is something that he might have a little success on, right? At least when it comes to the idiotic and cult-like MAGA base, Donald Trump saying, I don't care if it's illegal, or I don't care what the Democrats say, they're overreacting, I want to keep you safe. We know this is a lie. Donald Trump wouldn't pardon a drug trafficker, they're not going to care about that. But the argument of the strict legality, and Donald Trump saying, like, I will do anything it takes to keep you safe. Again, a lie, is something that will play well with his base, which I think is what he is worried about most right now, as MAGA's in a state of civil war, and Donald Trump certainly doesn't want us to be thinking about the Epstein files. But I think having simply just that debate is a miscalculation for Democrats. I think we need to talk about the moral failure of this administration, the past ways that forever wars have hurt us so deeply, and why we need a change from the policy of the past that Donald Trump is clinging to, it seems, for his own personal gain, benefit, and because he thinks this is a smart political maneuver. We need to call that out. I think that is just as important as pointing out the illegality, of course, of the utmost importance. But then also, Democrats follow that up not just by saying, that's illegal, done, mic drop. Okay, expound upon that. Right? Pam Bondi is in contempt of Congress right now. Every day she is obstructing justice. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are moving forward with legislation that would personally fine Pam Bondi $5,000 to $10,000 a day, right, for her obstruction of Congress, or her obstruction of justice, for her refusal to comply. That's real punishment. Sure, Donald Trump can, I guess, wire Pam Bondi some crypto dollars, but there is a response. I think when we say that's illegal to something Trump does, it needs to be followed up with, and here is our lawsuit to stop it, or here's what the repercussions are. Because these people only respond to fear and intimidation. That's what I'd like to see from more Democrats. That is what we're going to be talking about on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video. If you're stuck around at the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Keep on fighting, y'all. Don't let them silence you. And until next time, I'll see you soon.